Hey everyone, it's Abby. Today is the last day of Costube Symposium, or COSY, Day 4. This is the new name that was chosen for last year's Co-COVID. Co-COVID last year is actually what got me inspired to start my own YouTube channel not long after, which is why I get to participate this year. Making gloves can be a very difficult but rewarding experience. As I explained in my previous video, I make gloves because my hands are larger than normal and sometimes it's hard to match colors. My first stretch gloves were actually for my 90s Rogue back in the day because I couldn't find yellow gloves at the time. I'm very glad I got started about 12 years ago. It's so useful to be able to make your own gloves. I used the blog Weapon of Creation when I first started making gloves so long ago. I can link that in the description below. It was so useful how they broke down how to make your own pattern. Today we will walk through the steps to make opera-length gloves for my historical costumes. You can shorten them to make regular length gloves as well. I'll show you how. And I mean, Lycra really isn't historically accurate, but it's really useful to have stretchy fabrics, so I don't think it really matters. So let's get started. Part 1. Making the pattern. I get out a piece of pattern paper. You want something bigger than your hand. I place my hand on the paper. I keep my fingers tight. This is just a preference for my pattern. You can actually trace your hand all spread out too. This might actually be easier if you're just getting started because you won't have those sharp corners that you'll need to turn at the bottom of the finger. Trace with pencil around your whole hand to the wrist. Keep the pencil straight up and down to get a good trace. I straighten out the lines at this point. I also make sure the thumb is the right size, 1/4 of your thumb circumference. I also straighten out that edge. It will be on the fold. I check sizing with my other pair of gloves to make sure I'm on the right track. I label the glove pattern and mark the wrist area. I make notes about my arm measurements as I take a few that I need, bicep 11 inches and length 15 inches. I get out a larger piece of pattern paper. I have an arm pattern that I created using the Weapon of Creation blog. You can read through to learn how to create that if you need one. You could also use a sleeve pattern from another pattern that you have. My sleeve pattern is folded in half. The pattern adjusts for stretch already, so I don't have to worry about that. There's another blog called Stretchy that I will link in the description that explains how to use math to account for the stretch of Lycra. I mark my straight center line, 16 inches long. This will make it 15.5 inches total length because I have a 1/2 inch elastic that I will be adding. I lay my sleeve pattern down and mark with pencil along the whole side. I check with my green gloves to make sure it's all lining up. I'm checking how long I want the gloves to be. These green gloves go all the way to my bicep to be opera length, so I know they are the right length for me. You can measure your own length by measuring from your wrist to where you want them to finish. Remember to add a little at the end for the elastic. I mark in the pattern in a few spots. I've already fit the gloves to my arm previously, so I know how they fit. If you need to do this yourself, just cut out the pattern as is, pin it together inside out along the seam allowance, and check it on your arm. If it needs to come in, pin it in with safety pins. Account for seam allowance, which for mine is 1/4 inch, and measure how much needs to be taken out of the pattern. Mark the adjustments on the pattern. I label my pattern with the length of 15.5 inches. I also mark the seam allowance of 1/4 inch, and I label the pattern as well. I cut out the pattern along my adjustments. I cut out my main glove pattern as well. You can see that the opera length adjustment pattern fits right up to the wrist of the main glove pattern. I mark where the fold of the fabric will be. I measure the whole length that the gusset will need to be, from the top of my thumb along all the edges of my fingers to the bottom of my pinky finger. I mark that measurement of 26 inches on the pattern. I measure the circumference of my thumb, 2 inches and a quarter. I mark half of that onto the paper. I trace one half of my thumb onto the paper as well. I fold in half and cut out the pattern. I label the pattern. Weapon of Creation says that the gusset should be 5/8 of an inch in width. I find closer to 1/2 inch to be a little better, but both will work. Part 2. Cutting out the fabric. I have a couple of different white lycras to choose from, a matte milliskin and a shiny moleskin. I chose the shiny moleskin. My favorite type of lycra spandex is the wet look spandex. I'll link my favorite spandex shops based out of New York in the description. They ship anywhere in the US. I pin the glove pattern in place along the fold of doubled lycra. I cut out the glove with my large shears. I use my smaller scissors for cutting around the fingers. Then I cut down each of the fingers to separate them. I lay out the fabric so I have the long straight side and pin the thumb pattern to the edge. I cut out using my small scissors and measure as I go. I'm doing closer to 1/2 inch for my gusset. I measure to make sure I have 26 inches from the end of the thumb pattern. I cut around the curve of the thumb. There we go, 2 gloves cut out and ready to sew up. Part 3. Sewing up the gloves. I pinned the thumb gusset starting at the top. I'm using a straight stitch for this. Originally, I was going to use the non-shiny side of the lycra, but I ended up pinning the wrong sides together, so we get shiny gloves instead. I anchor the thread and sew using the smallest seam allowance I can manage. I think it's like 1/8 of an inch. I sew along the edge of the thumb. When I get to the end, I make sure the needle is down, lift the presser foot, and turn the corner. I move the gusset to make sure it lines up with the finger. You may have to stretch the back a bit to get it to go through. I continue to machine sew along the edge of the finger. When I get to the top of the finger, I put the needle down, lift the presser foot, turn a bit, line up the seam again, and sew a bit. I keep doing this until I turn the whole finger top. Don't worry about if you have to stretch it a bit as you sew to get the fabric through. The feed dogs really like to eat lycra, so pulling from the back either the fabric or the thread ends can help you get it to sew better. When I get to the bottom of the finger, I put the needle down, lift the presser, turn the corner, and line up the gusset seam again. If your seam gets too close to the edge, you can back up your stitching and start again. It's not going to hurt to have a few of those spots. It's harder to fix holes than it is to worry about a couple of extra stitches. When I get to the end of the pinky, I anchor the stitching near the bottom of the finger. ready to attach the other side of the glove. I start by pinning the thumb again, and I sew along the side of the thumb. I go through the same process of making sure the needle is down, lifting the presser foot, turning the corner, and lining up the seam again. Again, if you stretch the fabric as you sew a bit, it's not too big of a deal. Sometimes that's the best way to get around the corners. The hardest part is getting around the tops of the fingers. I have to make sure the edges of the fabric are together as I go, and slowly turn the curve. It's best to be slower for this, as it's very easy for things to move. If you need to use pins for this, please do so. It may make your life easier. I just find using pins to be harder for myself. When I get to the pinky, I make sure to line up the bottom of the pinkies. The gusset goes out to the side to be cut off later. I keep going with the straight stitch until I get to the wrist. I ease out to a 1/4 inch seam allowance by the time I get to the wrist. I change my machine stitch settings to use my 3-step zigzag, my favorite stretch stitch. I change the tension to about 5.5, the stitch length to less than 1, and the stitch width to almost 5. You could also use any other stretch stitch that your machine has, or you could use a serger. I do have one, I just don't use it for this as I find this 3-step zigzag to be more stable. I now have the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I just sew along the edge of the rest of the glove. If you need to lift the presser foot to resituate your seam, remember to put the needle down first. I remember to add pins at this point. It really does help to have this part pinned so it doesn't move around as much. No need to anchor the 3-step zigzag. It's very stable and will not unravel. I should have switched to my Teflon foot and a stretch needle. This really helps with stretchy fabrics because the fabric moves a bit easier and you don't have as many feed dog issues. Part 4. Finishing the gloves. I measure my bicep. Unflexed is 11 inches, flexed is 11.5. I cut a piece of elastic that's 12 inches so I have overlap. I pin at each side 1/2 inch in and place a pin at the center as well. I place a pin at the fold of the top of my glove as well. I ease cut off the tip of the seam of the glove so it's not so pointy. I pin the elastic at each of the points to the inside of the glove. I later realized I should have overlapped and sewed up the middle of the elastic before sewing it up. Learn from my mistakes so you don't have to seam rip like I did. I stretch and pin the quarter sections as well. I use my 3-step zigzag and sew along the edge of the elastic on the inside of the glove. For this, I stretch as I sew because the elastic is slightly smaller than the glove. I also removed the base of my machine so I can wrap my fabric around the smaller base. I overlap the stitching at the end. I cut off the hanging edge of the gusset. I place my hands inside the inside-out glove in order to turn it right side out. Because it's stretchy, I can just start the finger and then use my fingers to finish turning them out fully. You can tell that it's a bit twirly and the fingers are a bit thin. The gusset makes up for that really, and it really doesn't bother me. You could make up for that with changing the width of the gusset in places and widening the pattern, but that makes this pattern much more complex, so I really don't bother. I fold the elastic to the inside and pin in place. I use a single thread and hand whip stitch through the elastic and both layers of fabric to anchor the cuff in place. You could use a tiny machine zigzag for this step as well, but I just like how much more invisible this stitch is. Off camera, I actually had to seam rip this whole part. I realized I needed to make the elastic about 10.5 inches to keep it on my bicep better. I also ended up anchoring the elastic in the circle before placing it on the cuff and sewing it up the same way all over again. So if you want regular length stretchy gloves, the only difference is you don't have to add the fold over elastic to the cuff. You don't need to finish the edge of the elastic at all if you don't want to. I definitely don't. Just make the cuff the length you want and leave it be. Part 5, the final reveal. And there we have it, completed stretchy opera length gloves. Thank you for joining me today as I showed you how to make a pair of opera-length stretchy gloves. I love these kind of gloves for historical ball gowns, Edwardian, Victorian, and Regency. These green gloves are actually originally from my rogue costume that I made to match. And then it turned out they matched my green silk Edwardian gown perfectly as well. This white pair will be used for some of my lighter colored evening dresses. Don't forget to check out the other creators' pages for all the other cozy content. They will still be available after this weekend. Check out my description for a link to the badge info for this video as well. If you liked this video and want to see more sewing and costume videos, remember to subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Happy sewing, and have fun with the rest of this year's cozy event! Diana. Hello. Hello.